It's been a little while since I've seen a Spike Lee movie. Can't remember the last one I saw, actually. I still haven't gotten to Black Klansman. I need to. I've wanted to watch that one, actually, for a bit. But what I ended up seeing this past weekend with Liz was Da Five Bloods. And Spike Lee is one of those directors who, when he's on, he's really good. And in a way that, like, you can tell precisely what he brought to the table and things that he did with the material that someone else wouldn't have done. He's not always on, but when he is, oh boy, he's on with this one. This is a really, really good piece of work. So if you don't know a ton about it, I will end up getting into spoilers a little bit later, but I'm just going to start off telling you the initial premise. So it deals with 4 Vietnam veterans, 4 black Vietnam veterans, coming together and taking a trip to Vietnam now, and going back to a place where they actually lost one of their members. So there's 4 of these guys. It's the 5 Bloods. One of them didn't make it out when they were all together in Vietnam. Now, there's more going on with it than that, and there's definitely plenty of stuff that happens moving forward. But that's sort of your starting premise. So it is dealing with the connections and the relationships between these men, the relationships that they have, and the feelings they have towards their time in Vietnam, what they did while they were here, and to what degree they are okay with whatever it was that happened, the way their lives are going back home in the States, the way they interact with this country that is now completely different from the last time they were here, and then just sort of other stuff that goes on that's a little bit more spoilery. The performances are all great. There's a number of people in here that I think for your average movie viewer, there's a number of, oh, hey, that guy from The Thing faces. And that's people like Jean Reno, Delroy Lindo, who I'm got to come back to. Probably the biggest name, the biggest face for most people is going to be Chadwick Boseman. And he plays the one member of the 5 who didn't make it out alive. So he only appears in flashbacks. And it's kind of interesting having the only one who's kind of stuck in only one time and doesn't get to be across the movie be the biggest, most recognizable name, especially given the way that the rest of them kind of talk about this guy and the terms in which they kind of revere him. Someone like Chadwick Boseman's a really good fit for that. Plus, he plays the part really well. Now, when I say things that it like Spike Lee brings that I feel like other directors wouldn't have brought, there's some stuff that like, okay, maybe somebody would have thought of that, like it changes aspect ratio for different things. When it goes back to Vietnam, it's more akin to a 3x4, sort of a old TV thing, and then it widens out to actually like even beyond a normal widescreen. It widens out to like sort of almost Lawrence of Arabia size width on the screen for when they're in modern times. And so there's that. I'm like, well, somebody else might have thought of that. But there's the fact that when we get the flashbacks to Vietnam, with Chadwick Boseman there is no younger version of the actors from the rest of the film. They are playing themselves. So the old actors, not using makeup or CGI or anything to make them look any younger, they just play their young selves. And you can see some differences in the way the characters are played, but the old versions are just there in the past. And I don't think too many directors would have thought to have done that. And if you'd asked me, I probably wouldn't. Not only would I not have thought to do something like that, I probably would have said, "Don't do that. That's confusing." It wasn't the instant I caught it, because like when you see them, there's a lot of stuff going on. They're in the jungle. You don't get a good look right, so you don't even notice immediately. But then when I caught it, I was like, "Oh, that's kind of fascinating." And it's like there's no commentary on it. It just is. And there's a lot of touches like that. And also looking into the making of it a little bit and realizing that an earlier version of the same script was going to be made by Oliver Stone like 6 years previous. And it wasn't even about black soldiers in that version. That bringing in that element was something Spike Lee brought in. And this version of the movie, I can't imagine the movie being anywhere near as good without that element. Because the relationship that these black men have with each other, with the nation that they are risking their lives for, is at the heart of a lot of what is going on. This is along the same lines of why I love Spike Lee's Inside Man, which is, for me personally, and I'm not saying one is better than the other. I'm saying only for my personal taste. I am more partial to something that is a story with political overtones and political influences and aspects and plot lines, where if you stripped all the politics out of it, is a story I would still find interesting. That's my favorite kind of story with political overtones. I have similar feelings to Knives Out, which is deeply political at times. But even if you removed all the political elements, I would still find that an interesting story. So when you do it that way, you take what I think is an interesting story and make it even better. Whereas when the focus is primarily on the politics and the narrative is not as strong, or at least doesn't feel as central, it's harder for me to get into it. So something like this, that is telling an interesting story about pain and damage and brotherhood and some other stuff that, again, is a little spoilery. I'll get to that in a minute. And then layering in the racial politics in with that. Not just laying it in, like I say laying in. It's not like it's just an overlay. It's interwoven. It is all across this thing, from the kinds of broadcasts that the North Vietnamese would put out on radio directed at black soldiers, because they knew that back home these same people did not have equal rights, and back home things were a mess. And so they would send out basically anti-propaganda in the form of, hey, all this stuff's happening to your brothers back in the US, and you're here killing us. Why? So it's got that stuff going on, and it takes a moment to acknowledge the point when they found out, and they're in Vietnam when it happens, when they found out that Martin Luther King Jr. was killed. Like, and that is a big moment for these characters. This stuff isn't peripheral. It is central. But there is still a narrative that is strong even without these elements. And then these elements make it deeper, make it richer, and make the characters all the more fascinating. I am going to get a little bit into somewhat spoiler stuff in a minute. Before I do, if Delroy Lindo does not get an Oscar nomination for his work in this, then we need to just burn the Academy Awards to the ground, because holy crap. Now, I've always liked Delroy Lindo, and he is kind of one of those actors who, for a lot of people, is like, oh, that guy, he was in that thing that I saw. But I love him. I've loved him for a while, and he owns this movie, even more so than Chadwick Boseman. Chadwick Boseman is great and magnetic, as he always is, but Delroy Lindo commands the screen for stretches of this, and he pours his soul onto the camera. It's heavy and it's difficult to watch in the best way. He's really, really phenomenal. And playing a character that I would have thought would have been very hard to sell, because he is, this isn't really a spoiler because it's revealed very early on, he's a black Trump supporter. And to take that seeming contradiction in concepts and show us the layers to him and get us into his head in a way that you may not necessarily fully relate to him, but you understand how he is and why he thinks the way he does. And also understand this is an ensemble piece, so it's not like his story alone, but his performance is the one you're gonna come away going, wow, he's amazing. Now I am gonna get a little bit into spoilery stuff. The first few things I'm gonna say are light spoilers because this is stuff that's found out fairly early on. I'll get into heavier stuff in a bit. On the light spoiler territory, ultimately, I'm impressed at how much new material was mined out of what is effectively a remake of The Treasure of the Sierra Madre. It's just guys find gold, it tears them apart. It's that story stretched out over a longer period of time because they obviously leave in Vietnam and then have to come back for it. And there's a lot more laid in, but that is the core of it. It is the Treasure of the Sierra Madre as the gold strains and cracks their relationships with each other, even coming out of moments of triumph, joint triumph. And it really is able to embody what you would expect out of a good retelling of that kind of story with all the nuance and the elements and the weight of years and age and living in a country like the US when you're black, which again, I can't relate to. It's not my experience, it never will be, but to feel like I'm watching how all of that builds these characters, it's really terrifically done. And now we're getting into real proper spoilers. I didn't know how many of them were going to die. I kind of called that, I called somebody was going to step on a landmine. I'm like, it got seeded early on, like in early footage of Vietnam, you see, a soldier sweeping with a landmine. I'm like, that footage wasn't in there by accident. They seeded like right before the opening credits that there were landmines in Vietnam. Somebody's going to get blown up. So when that happened, it wasn't a huge shock. But then later on with stuff going on where, well, Delroy Lindo's character just breaks off and just goes out on his own and is just railing against the world. And he has this vision of Chadwick Boseman's character of Norman. And you find out what it was that happened. And I'm not even going to say it, even though I'm in spoiler territory. You find out the specifics of that, and it is powerful. And it so much makes sense about how destructive, self-destructive this guy is. But he doesn't make it. There's a character who, and again, in hindsight, I should have seen this coming. He said earlier on, yeah, I would never jump on a grenade for you guys. Guess what he does? He jumps on a grenade. Only one of them makes it through. Which, by the end, I was kind of surprised. I was kind of like, oh God, they're all going to die. But it does a really good job of where that could have felt tragic. And there is a tragedy to it, certainly to some of the specific characters. To see what then gets done with the money. To take something born out of pain. And the collecting of it just caused more pain. That there was still good done with it. That there was still something that could be done for the benefit of people who needed it, even after all of this. It's a really well done movie, and probably deeper and denser than I'm prepared to unpack going unscripted. It's a little long. Except I'm not sure that it's too long because I can't think of any part that I would trim down or cut out. It's masterfully paced, brilliantly acted. It's just a real good movie. And if you haven't watched it, I hope you will. The Five Bloods. Have you seen it? What did you think about it? Whatever your thoughts are, drop something down in the comments. Let's talk about it. Like, share, subscribe are all things that help me out. What helps me out even more is the Patreon, which is how I pay my bills. Any amount you're able to contribute does bring some degree of perks to you, but no pressure. Try and take a relaxed attitude around here so you can just come on back the next time you need a break.